In the steel and glass heart of Chicago, where legacies are forged in commodities pits and shattered by a single bad winter, a deal that could redefine the American agricultural landscape for a generation was bleeding out on a white linen tablecloth. Inside the hushed, mahogany-paneled sanctuary of the Pinnacle Steakhouse, Arthur Sterling, a man whose craggy face was as much a part of the Midwest industrial scene as the tractors his company built, was drowning in a sea of silence. Across from him, the Russian delegation, led by the impassive former apparatchik Mikhail Volkov, looked as if they were carved from Siberian granite. Arthur's translator, a high-priced linguistic prodigy, had vanished. Not stuck in traffic. Vanished. A cryptic text about a burst appendix was the only epitaph for a $500 million deal. Now, Arthur Sterling's empire, Sterling Agriculture, was teetering on the brink of a Cyrillic abyss. But just a few feet away, refilling a water glass with the practiced invisibility of her profession, was a young waitress named Anya. To these titans of industry, she was nothing more than a pair of hands and a black apron, a ghost who ensured their glasses were never empty. They had no idea they were looking at their last and only hope. What she was about to do wouldn't just be about translating words. It was about deciphering souls, unmasking a traitor, and exposing a secret buried in the heart of the Sterling Empire. The air in the Pinnacle's private Churchill room was thick with the scent of seared prime rib, vintage Bordeaux, and the acrid tang of pure, undiluted panic. Arthur Sterling, a man who could intimidate senators with a single glare, felt a cold sweat trickle down his spine. The knot in his stomach was tighter than the bolts on his company's flagship S9000 combine harvester. Across the sprawling oak table sat Mikhail Volkov and his two lieutenants. Volkov was the chairman of Agrovast, a sprawling Russian agricultural conglomerate that controlled a landmass the size of Texas. They were in Chicago for one reason: to finalize a deal to purchase 2,000 of Sterling's most advanced GPS-guided farming machines. It was a $500 million contract, but that was just the appetizer. It was the gateway to the vast, untapped potential of the Eurasian market. A legacy-defining move that would cement Sterling Agriculture's dominance for the next 50 years. And it was all dissolving because of a ruptured organ 1,000 miles away. "Perhaps, Mr. Sterling," Volkov said, his English a low, gravelly rumble, heavily accented but grammatically perfect. "We postpone. This is a complex agreement. Precision is not a luxury." The word postpone was a dagger. Volkov and his team were flying out of O'Hare in the morning. Postponing meant losing momentum. It meant signaling incompetence, a cardinal sin in Volkov's world. Worse, it meant giving a window to their arch-rival, the German behemoth Klaus Werke, who had been courting Agrovast for months. Arthur had heard the whispers. This dinner was his closing argument, his final decisive play. "Not at all, Mikhail," Arthur boomed, his voice a practiced baritone that belied the frantic screaming inside his skull. "Leo is merely indisposed, a minor medical issue. He'll send his notes. We can proceed with the key points." It was a lie so thin it was transparent, and the polite, almost imperceptible narrowing of Volkov's eyes confirmed he saw right through it. The Russian delegation valued strength and meticulous preparation above all. A failure of logistics this fundamental wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a profound insult. Gregory Finch, Arthur's senior VP of Global Strategy, leaned in, his own face pale. "Arthur, this is a disaster. We can't discuss the service-level agreements or the proprietary software clauses without a dedicated translator. We need to cut our losses and beg for a follow-up in Moscow." Gregory was the one who had vetted and hired the now absent translator. His panic seemed sharper, more personal. "Quiet, Gregory," Arthur hissed, a sheen of sweat now visible on his tanned forehead. It was in this suffocating high-stakes vacuum that Anya Petrova moved with silent efficiency. To Arthur and his executive team, she was part of the decor, as functional and unheated as the heavy silver cutlery. She refilled water glasses without a whisper of sound, cleared salad plates with a grace that was both swift and self-effacing. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight, severe bun, and her face was a mask of polite neutrality. But behind that mask, Anya was an engine of observation. She didn't just feel the tension in the room. She understood its specific gravity. She saw the forced bonhomie on Arthur Sterling's face and the glacial disappointment in the eyes of his guests. She hadn't spoken a word to them beyond a murmured, "Excuse me," simply nodding and anticipating their needs. As she reached for Volkov's side plate, he muttered a reflexive spasibo under his breath, not even glancing up. Anya paused for a microsecond, her fingers hovering inches from the porcelain. She caught his eye for a fleeting moment and replied in a soft, low voice, so quiet it was almost lost in the room's oppressive silence. "Pожалуйста, pожалуйста." "You're welcome." Volkov's eyes, chips of gray flint, widened almost imperceptibly. A flicker of surprise, of genuine human curiosity, broke through his stony facade. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. He saw a young woman, perhaps 23 or 24, with intelligent eyes that held a depth he hadn't expected. But the moment passed. She was a waitress. He gave a slight, almost dismissive nod and returned his attention to the crumbling deal in front of him. Anya retreated to her station in the corner of the room, her heart thumping against her ribs. She hadn't meant to speak. The Russian word had just slipped out, a ghost from a life she kept locked away. She watched the tableau of quiet desperation continue. Arthur Sterling, in a move of pure desperation, was now trying to use a translation app on his phone. The robotic, tinny voice was mangling complex terms about torque vectoring and yield algorithms into nonsensical gibberish. One of Volkov's aides, a younger man with a sharp suit, had to disguise a snort of derision as a cough. It was a catastrophic breach of etiquette, the final, shuddering death rattle of the negotiation. Anya felt a pang of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, a potent cocktail of indignation and opportunity. She knew this language. She knew its soul, its fatalism, its hidden poetry, its demand for respect. She had learned it not in a classroom, but at her grandmother's knee, in a cramped Chicago apartment that always smelled of borscht and black tea. It was the language of her ancestors, people who had fled the wreckage of the Soviet Union with nothing but their history and their resilience. It was part of a life where she wasn't Anya the waitress, but Anya the scholar, the top of her class in Slavic studies at the University of Chicago, the girl who was supposed to be at the State Department by now. But life had a brutal way of rewriting futures. Her father's sudden illness, a cascade of medical bills that the insurance company refused to cover, had shattered her family's fragile American dream. It had forced her to drop out of graduate school, trading dreams of diplomacy for the grim reality of 2 jobs, mountains of debt, and the constant, gnawing worry for her parents. Her world was now the 4 walls of this restaurant, serving men like Arthur Sterling, men who would never guess that the person pouring their $1,000 wine could bridge the very chasm that was about to cost them $500 million. The deal was dead. She was the only person in the room who could perform the resurrection. The question, a terrifying thunderclap in her mind, was whether she would dare to even try. The atmosphere in the room had soured from tense to funereal. Arthur Sterling's phone had just made its most fatal error, translating long-term parts and service guarantee into something that sounded perilously close to eternal servitude for your machine operators. Mikhail Volkov's stony expression didn't change, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. That was enough. He placed his heavy silver fork and knife down on his plate with deliberate final precision. The quiet clink of metal on porcelain was as loud as a guillotine's blade dropping. "Mr. Sterling," he began, his voice flat and devoid of any previous warmth. "I thank you for the magnificent steak. However, it is clear we have reached an impasse. Without precise, intelligent communication, to proceed would be an act of foolishness. We cannot do business with fools." This was it, the eulogy. Arthur felt a wave of cold nausea. He saw his company's stock price tumbling. He saw the smug, triumphant face of Hans Richter, the CEO of Klaus Werke. He saw his father's legacy, a company built from a single garage workshop into a global force, turning to rust. He was about to offer a final groveling apology when a clear, calm voice sliced through the tension. "Прошу прощения за мою дерзость, господа." Proшу прощения за мою дерзость, господа. Forgive my impertinence, gentlemen. Every head in the room snapped toward the sound. It was the waitress, Anya. She stood by the service credenza, her hands clasped respectfully before her. She hadn't raised her voice, but it carried through the room with an unnerving clarity. Gregory Finch scoffed audibly. What in God's name is this? Get back to your station. Arthur was about to wave her away, his face a mask of fury and embarrassment at this bizarre interruption, but he was stopped by the look on Mikhail Volkov's face. The Russian chairman wasn't looking at Arthur anymore. His gaze was fixed on Anya, his flinty eyes alight with an expression of profound, rapier-sharp curiosity. He remembered her, the girl who had answered him in perfect, unaccented Russian. You have something to say, Devushka? Volkov asked, his English pointed and direct, using the Russian word for girl. Anya took a deep, steadying breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every survival instinct screamed at her to apologize, to melt back into the shadows. This was not her world. These men moved markets and shaped nations. She was a nobody, a servant with a tray and an apron. But then she caught her own reflection in the polished silver champagne bucket. She saw the tired eyes, the drab uniform, the exhaustion, and a lifetime of swallowed pride and frustrated ambition ignited within her. This was a chance, not just to save their deal, but to save herself from a life of being invisible. She addressed Mikhail Volkov directly, switching to formal Russian, her words not the hesitant phrases of a student, but the fluid, respectful, and nuanced language of a native speaker. «Господин Volkov», she began, inclining her head slightly, «мне больно видеть, как языковой барьер становится преградой для столь важных переговоров между двумя великими компаниями. Возможно, я могу быть чем-то полезна». Mr. Volkov, it pains me to see a language barrier become an obstacle to such important negotiations between two great companies. Perhaps I can be of some assistance. The effect was instantaneous and seismic. Volkov's two aides, who had been slumping in their chairs with boredom, sat bolt upright as if struck by lightning. Their jaws were slack with utter astonishment. Mikhail Volkov's stoic mask didn't just crack, it disintegrated. He stared at Anya, his eyes wide with frank disbelief. Arthur and his team could only watch, utterly, completely dumbfounded. They hadn't understood a single word, but the electrifying change in the Russian's demeanor told them something extraordinary had just happened. Arthur found his voice first, a strangled croak. What the hell did you just say to him? Anya turned to Arthur, her expression calm, but her eyes burning with intensity. I apologize for interrupting, Mr. Sterling, and I told Mr. Volkov that I believed I could be of assistance. Volkov leaned forward, his entire body language transformed. The cold, dismissive posture was gone, replaced by a predator's laser-like focus. He fired back at Anya in a rapid, complex stream of Russian, his questions sharp and technical. Вы разбираетесь в технических и юридических терминах? Речь идет о патентованных технологиях, сервисных контрактах и вопросах интеллектуальной собственности. Do you understand technical and legal terminology? We are discussing patented technologies, service contracts, and matters of intellectual property. Without a single beat of hesitation, Anya replied, her Russian as crisp and precise as his. Да, разбираюсь. Я изучала международное право и экономику в Чикагском университете. Законы, регулирующие международную торговлю, были частью моей специализации. Yes, I do. I studied international law and economics at the University of Chicago. The laws governing international trade were part of my specialization. It was the truth. She didn't need to lie or embellish. The mention of the University of Chicago, a world-renowned institution right in their own city, sent another shockwave across the table. This wasn't a waitress who'd picked up a few phrases from a boyfriend. This was someone with a formidable, relevant academic background. Arthur Sterling felt as if the floor had just vanished from beneath his feet. He was witnessing a scene that defied all logic. His waitress was holding her own in a high-level exchange with the man who held the future of his company in his hands. He couldn't understand the words, but he understood the body language perfectly. The hostility had vanished, replaced by rapt, genuine attention. Gregory Finch tugged at his sleeve, his face a comical picture of confusion. "Arthur, who is she? What is happening?" "I have no earthly idea," Arthur muttered, his eyes locked on Anya. She seemed to stand taller now. The timid server had been replaced by a confident, articulate professional. It was like watching a hawk emerge from the shell of a sparrow. Volkov turned to Arthur, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face for the first time all evening. It was not a friendly smile, but it was a smile of respect. "Mr. Sterling," he said in English, a new dangerous light in his eyes, "it appears you have been hiding your most valuable asset." He then gestured with one large hand toward the empty chair beside him, the one intended for the translator. "Miss Anya," she supplied softly. "Anya Petrova." "Miss Petrova," Volkov said with a deep, respectful nod. "Please, join us." The walk from the corner of the room to that grand oak table was the longest journey of Anya's life. It felt like crossing a chasm, with the weight of every gaze of physical force upon her. Her server's apron, stained with a tiny drop of wine, suddenly felt like a ridiculous costume, a relic from a past life she was still wearing. With hands that trembled only slightly, she untied it, folded it into a neat square, and placed it on the server's credenza. It was a small gesture, but it was a declaration. The waitress was gone. She took the seat Volkov had indicated. The plush, claret-red leather was a universe away from the hard wooden stools in the employee break room. The table was no longer a workplace. It was her arena. Arthur Sterling stared at her, his mind struggling to process the seismic shift that had just occurred. His VP, Gregory, looked as if she had just confessed to being a Martian. "Miss Petrova," Arthur began, his voice tight with controlled shock, "you have some explaining to do." "Mr. Volkov was questioning my qualifications," Anya said calmly, addressing Arthur, but keeping her posture respectfully oriented toward the Russian delegation. "I assured him I am familiar with the terminology of international trade law." Gregory Finch snorted, a harsh, incredulous sound. "You learned that serving coffee and mopping floors?" His voice was dripping with contempt. Before Anya could respond, Volkov interjected, speaking to her in rapid Russian, his tone all business. She listened, her brow furrowed in deep concentration, nodding slightly as he spoke. After a full minute, she turned back to Arthur's side of the table. "Mr. Volkov wishes to return to the primary point of contention," she announced, her voice now imbued with an authority that silenced the room. "It is not the price per unit, as you assumed. It is Clause 11, subsection C, regarding the long-term service and parts depots. He says your proposal to establish 3 depots in Western Russia is, and I quote, an insult to the scale of our land. He believes you see Russia as a provincial market, not a continent. He says without a commitment to at least 10 service centers, including 3 east of the Urals, your machines are nothing but expensive American coffins, waiting for a single part to fail." Arthur's jaw tightened. This was the core of it, the real issue. And his own team, with their high-priced but culturally deaf consultants, had completely missed it. They had been haggling over price points while Volkov was testing their commitment. "Tell him that establishing 10 depots is a logistical nightmare," Arthur said slowly, testing her. "The capital investment would be enormous." Anya nodded. But when she turned back to Volkov, she did not simply parrot Arthur's words. She transformed them. She became not a conduit, but a bridge. She spoke in Russian, her tone respectful but firm. «Господин Волков, мистер Стерлинг полностью понимает ваши опасения. Он рассматривает это не как расход, а как инвестицию в долгосрочное партнерство. Он уполномочил меня предложить встречный план. Мы начнем с 5 сервисных центров в первый год и добавим еще по 1 каждый последующий год, пока их не станет 10. Это будет прописано в контракте как железное обязательство. Это не просто слова, это залог нашей веры в ваш успех. Mr. Volkov, Mr. Sterling understands your concerns completely. He sees this not as an expense, but as an investment in a long-term partnership. He has authorized me to propose a counterplan. We will begin with 5 service centers in the first year and add 1 more each subsequent year until the number reaches 10. This will be written into the contract as an ironclad obligation. This is not just talk. It is a guarantee of our faith in your success. She had taken Arthur's reluctance and reframed it as a strategic, phased rollout. She used the phrase ironclad obligation, железное обязательство, a term that resonated deeply with the Russian business mindset, which valued strength and unbreakable promises. It was a masterful stroke of cultural diplomacy. Volkov listened intently, his fingers steepled before him. He conferred in low, urgent tones with his aides. The air, once stagnant with failure, now crackled with the electric energy of genuine negotiation. It was as if a dam had broken, and decades of miscommunication and cultural mistrust were being swept away, all channeled through this astonishing young woman. One of Volkov's aides, the legal expert, raised a technical point about supply chain guarantees. He spoke for nearly 2 minutes, his speech laden with jargon. Anya listened, her focus absolute, her eyes never leaving his. She didn't take a single note. When he finished, she turned to Arthur. Mr. Yevgraf is concerned about supply chain integrity for the eastern depots. He points out that getting a specialized hydraulic pump from Chicago to Siberia could take weeks, rendering a multi-million-dollar machine useless during a critical harvest window. He wants a contractual guarantee of 72-hour parts delivery to any depot. Gregory Finch threw his hands up. That's impossible. We can't control Siberian weather or Russian customs. We can't promise that. Arthur looked at the contract, then at Anya. Her face was serene, analytical. The panicked girl who served them bread an hour ago was gone. In her place was a formidable strategist. All right, Arthur said, his voice now laced with a respect that shocked his own team. Anya, what do you think? He hadn't asked his senior VP. He hadn't asked his legal counsel. He had asked the waitress. Anya hesitated for only a fraction of a second, momentarily stunned by the directness of the question. He was asking for her business counsel. She looked at the faces around the table, the Russians leaning forward, hopeful and engaged, Arthur's team stupefied into silence, and Arthur himself, his billionaire's arrogance stripped away, leaving only a raw, desperate hunger for a solution. She took a breath and gave him her unvarnished assessment. Sir, promising something we can't control is foolish, but we can promise what we can control. Instead of guaranteeing a delivery time, we guarantee the solution. We can pre-stock each depot with a comprehensive inventory of critical, high failure rate components based on our own predictive maintenance data. We absorb the upfront cost of that inventory. It shows commitment. It solves their practical problem, and it bypasses the logistical impossibilities. We aren't promising a miracle. We are promising smart, proactive preparation. It was brilliant, simple, elegant, and it turned a weakness into a demonstration of strength and foresight. Arthur Sterling, the titan of industry, the man who trusted no one's judgment but his own, looked at the young woman who had served him his iced tea. He saw no hint of doubt in her eyes, only the clear, cold light of certainty. He let out a long, slow breath he didn't realize he had been holding for an hour. Anya, he said, his voice resonating with newfound authority, tell Mr. Volkov we agree to his 10 depots, and then explain to him your solution for the parts guarantee. Word for word. The moment Anya finished translating the new proposal, framing it not as a concession, but as Sterling's proactive partnership guarantee, the entire dynamic of the room shifted permanently. The last vestiges of tension dissolved, replaced by a palpable wave of mutual respect. Mikhail Volkov broke into a wide, genuine smile that transformed his severe features. He stood, extended a large hand across the table to Arthur, and pumped his arm firmly. Sterling, you have a deal. A real deal. A flurry of activity erupted. Lawyers on both sides, who had been sitting like statues, began furiously making notes on their tablets, redlining contracts and drafting addendums. Through it all, Anya remained the calm, efficient center of the storm. She facilitated the final details, translating complex legal and technical phrases back and forth with a fluency that left Arthur's seasoned legal counsel staring in slack-jawed admiration. She effortlessly navigated the delicate cultural dance of closing a major Russian deal, ensuring both sides felt they had achieved a hard-won victory. When the final memorandum of understanding was ready for a symbolic signing, Gregory Finch produced a gold-plated fountain pen. Arthur signed his name with a bold, relieved flourish. He then passed the pen to Volkov, who signed with a decisive slash of ink. The deal was done. $500 million snatched back from the precipice of oblivion. As champagne was poured, the mood became jovial. Volkov, who had been a block of ice an hour earlier, was now clapping Arthur on the back and laughing, proposing a toast. He raised his glass, but he didn't look at Arthur. He looked at Anya, who had modestly retreated toward the wall again, as if preparing to merge back into the scenery. "To Anya Petrova," Volkov boomed, his voice filling the room, "the finest negotiator in Chicago. Sterling, my friend, if you let this woman go, you are a bigger fool than I thought you were this afternoon." Arthur, his face flushed with champagne and sheer relief, locked eyes with Anya across the room. "Don't you worry, Mikhail," Arthur said, his gaze never leaving her. "I have no intention of doing so." The celebratory buzz eventually faded. The Russian delegation departed, their minds already on implementation and logistics, leaving behind a wake of cigar smoke and the scent of victory. Arthur's team, still reeling from the evening's whiplash of events, left one by one, each casting a look of pure, unadulterated awe at Anya as they passed. Finally, only Arthur, Gregory Finch, and Anya remained in the grand, silent room, surrounded by the debris of a historic meal. Gregory was fidgeting, looking deeply uncomfortable. Arthur walked over to Anya. He looked exhausted, but the frantic stress had been replaced by a deep, contemplative curiosity. "I don't even know where to begin," he said, his voice softer than she had ever imagined it could be. "Thank you feels wholly inadequate. You didn't just save a deal tonight, Anya. You saved this company from a decade of stagnation." "I was just glad I could help, sir," she said quietly, instinctively falling back into the deferential role of a server. He shook his head, a wry smile touching his lips. "No, that was more than help. That was a masterclass. The way you reframed the depot issue, the parts guarantee solution. Where did you learn to think like that?" Volkov mentioned the University of Chicago. This was the moment of reckoning, the moment her hidden life would be laid bare. She took a steadying breath and decided on the truth, the whole, unvarnished, painful truth. "Yes, sir. I was in their graduate program for international relations and economics. I had a full scholarship." Arthur's eyebrows shot up. "Had? What happened?" Anya's professional composure crumbled just a little, revealing the weary 24-year-old beneath. "Life happened, Mr. Sterling. My father, he was a mechanic, owned his own small shop. He had a massive stroke 2 years ago. The insurance had loopholes. The medical bills, they were astronomical. It wiped out my parents' savings in 6 months. I had to drop out to work. I took this job, and another as a barista in the mornings, just to keep them in their house and pay for his physical therapy." She spoke without a trace of self-pity, stating the facts of her life as plainly as she had translated the clauses of the contract. The story hung in the air between them, a brutal, stark contrast to the gilded opulence of the Churchill room. Arthur was silent for a long time. He was a man who dealt in the hard logic of steel, logistics, and balance sheets. He was now confronted with the messy, illogical reality of human struggle. He thought of his own privileged life, where the biggest disaster was a missing translator for a few hours. The sheer, grinding injustice of her situation struck him with the force of a physical blow. He had built his empire on the principle of meritocracy, of finding and elevating the best talent, and the most formidable strategic mind he had ever encountered was hiding in plain sight, buried under an avalanche of medical debt and misfortune. He turned his gaze to Gregory Finch, who was studiously avoiding eye contact. "Gregory, you hired Leo, the translator. You vetted him. How did he simply vanish?" Gregory swallowed hard. I don't know, Arthur. A medical emergency," he said. "It was completely unforeseen. A freak accident." His voice was a little too high, a little too defensive. Anya noticed it, a flicker of something, not just discomfort, but fear in the man's eyes. It was the same look a customer had when they were about to lie about a stain on the carpet. It was a detail, a tiny data point, and she filed it away. Arthur's attention returned to Anya. You're Russian, he said, his voice thick with emotion. It's flawless. It's more than fluent. It's intuitive. It was my first language, she explained. My grandparents fled the Soviet Union in the 80s. I grew up in a household where you spoke Russian at the dinner table or you didn't eat. He finally understood. It wasn't just academic knowledge. It was lived, breathed, ingrained in her very DNA. It was the combination of a world-class education and the grit forged in the crucible of immigrant hardship. That's what he had seen tonight. That's what had saved him. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick, heavy business card. This is my personal cell number, he said, handing it to her. I'm not going to insult you with a tip, Anya. That would be an insult to both of us. I want you to call this number at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. My assistant will be expecting you. Anya looked down at the card. The name Arthur Sterling was embossed in simple, powerful block letters. It felt heavier than a brick of gold. What for, sir? A genuine, warm smile finally reached Arthur's eyes. For a job interview. And also, I have a feeling you and I need to have a very serious discussion about Mr. Gregory Finch and his incredibly convenient run of bad luck. He glanced pointedly at his VP, who visibly paled. Anya Petrova, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. Your career as a waitress is officially over. Your career as a corporate asset is just beginning. Anya did not sleep. She sat in her cramped studio apartment in Pilsen, the heavy business card the only clean object on her cluttered kitchen table. The adrenaline of the evening had ebbed, leaving a disorienting brew of euphoria and stark terror. Could this be real? Was the life she had been forced to abandon, the world of strategy, intellect, and influence, actually within her reach again? Doubt, a familiar and corrosive companion, began to whisper in her ear. He was just grateful. He'll wake up tomorrow, his lawyers will talk him out of it, and he'll laugh at the absurd idea of hiring his waitress. Men like Arthur Sterling lived in a different cosmos, one where you didn't pluck solutions from the service staff. Then she thought of her father, sitting in his worn-out armchair, his once powerful mechanic's hands now struggling to hold a fork, his pride wounded deeper than his body. She thought of her mother, whose face was a permanent mask of worry. The thought of being able to lift that burden, to tell them the financial war was over, was a light so blindingly bright it burned away the shadows of her doubt. That thought gave her the courage. At precisely 9 a.m., her hand trembling, she dialed the number. Sterling, the voice was crisp. All business. Mr. Sterling, it's Anya Petrova. There was a pause, then his tone warmed instantly. Anya, good. I've been expecting you. My office. 11 a.m. Don't be late. The Sterling Tower was a monument of smoked glass and burnished steel that dominated the Chicago Loop. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and ambition, filled with people who moved with the effortless confidence of the chosen. Anya, wearing the only blazer she owned, a slightly too big thrift store find, felt like a ghost. The ghost haunting the Sterling Tower was named Anya Petrova. She moved through the cavernous marble lobby, feeling not like an employee, but an infiltrator. The air itself, smelling of sanitized money and recycled ambition, seemed to reject her. Her footsteps, which had been so sure and swift on the worn linoleum of the Pinnacle's kitchen, were now hesitant and soundless on the plush, abyss-black carpeting. Her reflection warped in the polished chrome of the elevator doors, showing a stranger in a thrift store blazer that was a size too large. A woman trying to wear a costume of a life she had only ever read about. She was ushered not to a waiting room, but directly to the penthouse floor, a realm of silent, stratospheric power. Arthur Sterling's office wasn't a room, it was a territory, a vast expanse of glass and steel that offered a god's-eye view of Chicago, from the placid blue infinity of Lake Michigan to the sprawling, hazy grid of the heartland his machines were built to conquer. He stood by the window, a silhouette against the city, but his focus was inward, on the thick manila file resting on his massive desk of polished obsidian. Miss Petrova, Anya, thank you for coming, he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to fill the space. He gestured to a leather armchair that looked as if it had been sculpted from a single piece of night. Please. She sat, her back ramrod straight, feeling the supple leather envelop her. It was a seat of power, and it felt utterly alien. "I had my security team run a preliminary background file on you last night," he began, bypassing all pleasantries. His eyes, the color of worn steel, were appraising her, dissecting her. "Valedictorian, full scholarship, University of Chicago. Every professor's report uses words like prodigy and exceptional intellect. The file is a portrait of a brilliant mind on a trajectory for the State Department or a Wall Street corner office. It contains no logical reason why you would be refilling water glasses at a steakhouse. Your story did that." He let the silence hang for a moment, a weight in the air. "I don't believe in coincidences, Anya. I believe in variables. You were an unaccounted for variable in a very carefully constructed equation, an equation designed for me to fail." He walked to his desk, his movements deliberate, powerful. "Gregory Finch has been my senior vice president for 12 years. He's sharp, he's capable, and for the past 18 months, he's been seething with a quiet fury because I have not named him my successor. He was the one who personally vetted and insisted we use this new translator, Leo Pasternak. Called him the best in the business. My people have been trying to locate Mr. Pasternak since dawn. His apartment was leased under a false name and paid for in cash. The real Leo Pasternak is a retired professor of Russian literature living in Vermont who hasn't accepted a translation job in a decade. The man hired by Gregory was a ghost." Arthur slid a sleek silver tablet across the impossibly smooth surface of the desk. On the screen was a document, its letterhead bearing the severe Teutonic logo of Klaus Verke. It was their initial offer to Agravest. "This was leaked to a friend of mine on their board in Munich. It's dated the morning of our dinner. They weren't just hoping we would fail, Anya. They had a guarantee. They knew the linchpin of the negotiation, the translator, was a phantom. The pieces didn't just click into place. They fused together with the cold, hard certainty of welded steel. The sabotage was not a last-minute betrayal, but a long, meticulously planned assassination of a deal. Gregory's panic at the restaurant wasn't the fear of a plan going wrong. It was the terror of an unexpected witness appearing at the scene of a perfect crime. "He sold you out," she breathed, the words feeling small and inadequate in the vast office. "He tried," Arthur corrected, his gaze turning to ice. "He tried to sell my father's legacy, but his plan had a flaw. He looked at the service staff and saw furniture. He didn't see a scholar. He didn't see a warrior. Now I need more than a theory. I need the weapon. Gregory is a creature of corporate warfare. He's careful. He won't have left a trail of breadcrumbs. He will have buried landmines. I need you to find one." He leaned forward, the full force of his personality focused on her like a lens. "I am offering you a position, a 6-month probationary contract as a special consultant to the CEO. The salary attached to this offer will not just solve your family's financial problems, it will eradicate them. It will provide for your father's care for the rest of his life. In return, you work for me, and only for me. Your first and only assignment is to dissect this treason. You are invisible in this building. To them, you're a temp, a data entry clerk. You have a perspective my entire executive team lacks. You see the details people are trained to ignore. You noticed the nuance in Gregory's fear last night, didn't you?" Anya nodded slowly, remembering the fleeting look in the VP's eyes. It wasn't disappointment. It was exposure. "Precisely," Arthur affirmed. "I want you to use that insight. I will grant you level 7 security clearance, the same as my own. You will have access to every email, every expense report, every communication log related to Gregory Finch for the past 2 years. Find me the link. Unearth the proof. If you do this, the position becomes permanent. Director of Eurasian Market Strategy, the architect of the very partnership you saved. If you fail or if you are discovered, the contract is terminated. We will have never met." It was not a job offer. It was a gauntlet thrown down, a ruthless, high-stakes trial by fire. He was not giving her a lifeline. He was handing her a scalpel and pointing her toward the heart of a conspiracy, demanding she perform the surgery alone. A lifetime of being overlooked, of being underestimated, of swallowing pride while her dreams turned to dust, coalesced into a single diamond-hard point of resolve in her chest. "I accept," she said, her voice betraying no tremor. For the next 23 days, Anya lived in a digital purgatory. Her office was a windowless cube in the sub-basement, a forgotten space between IT storage and the HVAC control room. She was a ghost in the machine, introduced vaguely as a temporary data analyst, a title so bland it rendered her instantly invisible. She would see Gregory Finch in the hallways. He would stride past, radiating arrogance and authority, sometimes giving her a dismissive, patronizing nod, the kind one gives to the cleaning staff. He had no idea the data clerk was meticulously cataloging the architecture of his downfall. She waded through an ocean of corporate data, a mind-numbing torrent of encrypted emails, password-protected spreadsheets, and redacted financial reports. It was a fortress of information designed to conceal as much as it revealed. But Anya's mind, trained to parse the dense legalese of international treaties and sharpened by the relentless calculus of survival, began to see patterns where others would see only static. She found the false trails first, a series of large cash withdrawals Gregory had made, a potential blackmail payment. No, it tracked to a high-stakes poker game he was known to frequent, a cryptic email chain with a competitor. It turned out to be a back-channel negotiation for a mid-level executive he was trying to poach. These dead ends were frustrating but crucial. They taught her the rhythm of Gregory's legitimate secrets, allowing her to better recognize the illegitimate ones. The breakthrough came not from finance, but from linguistics and culture, her native territory. She was examining Gregory's expense reports for a preparatory trip to Berlin 2 months prior. The trip's stated purpose was a marathon series of meetings with a German logistics firm, Schmidt Logistic, to plan for a potential European distribution network. The receipts for hotels and meals were all present and accounted for, but a detail nagged at her. For a man supposedly in back-to-back meetings, his corporate phone's data usage was anomalously low during business hours, but spiked in the late evenings from public Wi-Fi hotspots. It was the behavior of someone avoiding a monitored network. On a hunch born from academic discipline, Anya abandoned Gregory's files and began building a dossier on Klaus Werke. She devoured their press releases, shareholder reports, and executive interviews. She found an announcement for their new head of Eastern European expansion, a formidable executive named Dieter Vogel. A deep dive into German financial media led her to a gallery of photos from a Berlin industry gala. And there it was, a candid shot taken by a photojournalist. In the background, partially obscured by a champagne flute, was Gregory Finch. He was deep in conversation, leaning in conspiratorially with Dieter Vogel. The photo was time-stamped for the evening of the second day of his trip, a time he had claimed was spent in a working dinner with the logistics firm. It was damning, but it was circumstantial. He could claim it was an innocent chance encounter. She needed the final unbreakable link. The Железное обязательство. She returned to the expense report for that specific night, a dinner receipt from a Michelin-starred restaurant in Berlin's Charlottenburg district. He had expensed it as client entertainment, Schmidt Logistic. Anya, whose academic German was nearly as fluent as her Russian, began to scrutinize the itemized bill. Alongside the veal and Riesling, there was a final charge for 2 glasses of a specific, very expensive brand of herbal schnapps. Blutwurz, the name, which translated to bloodroot, was archaic, intense. A regional Bavarian specialty, not something a typical diner in Berlin would order. On its own, it was meaningless. But Anya wasn't a data analyst. She was a researcher. She dug deeper, searching for any connection between Klaus Werke and this obscure liqueur. The search was fruitless until she expanded her parameters, using German search terms and accessing academic archives. She found it in a footnote, a doctoral thesis on German post-war industrial dynasties from the University of Heidelberg. It was a long, dry academic text, but in a chapter on the Richter family, the founders of Klaus Werke, the author mentioned a peculiar family tradition. The founder, a stern Bavarian patriarch, had celebrated the closing of his first major contract with a toast of Blutwurz. The tradition had been passed down through 3 generations. The current CEO, Hans Richter, was known to be intensely superstitious about it. He considered a deal incomplete until it was sealed with a toast of bloodroot, a single word, a cultural ritual buried in an obscure academic text. a thread of linguistic history that tied Gregory Finch not just to a secret meeting with Klaus Werke's executive, but to the intimate, celebratory tradition of the very man orchestrating Arthur Sterling's demise. He hadn't just been talking, he had been celebrating a done deal. She didn't just compile the data, she wove it into a narrative, a cold, precise timeline of betrayal. The creation of the Phantom Translator, the secret trip to Berlin, the clandestine meeting with Vogel, and the final damning toast. She presented it to Arthur not as a collection of facts, but as an irrefutable story. Arthur listened in the vast silence of his office, his face a granite mask. As she concluded with the detail of the Blutwurz, a flicker of something ancient and dangerous lit his eyes. When she finished, he was quiet for a full minute, the only sound the distant hum of the city below. "Well done, Miss Petrova," he finally said, his voice flat and deadly. "You're hired. Now come with me. We have a board meeting to attend." The confrontation was not the brutal, swift affair Anya had imagined. It was something far colder, far more devastating. Arthur convened an emergency senior staff meeting in the main boardroom. Gregory Finch strode in, radiating confidence, expecting a routine update on the Agrovast fallout. He stopped short when he saw Anya sitting at the table, to Arthur's right. "Arthur, what's this? I thought this was a senior-level debrief," he said, a note of irritation in his voice, barely glancing at Anya. "It is, Gregory," Arthur said, his voice dangerously calm. He gestured for him to take his seat. "Miss Petrova has been conducting a post-mortem analysis for me on our recent European strategy. She found an interesting cultural detail. Tell me, Gregory, how was the Blutwurz in Berlin?" The blood drained from Gregory Finch's face. It was not a sudden collapse, but a slow, horrifying implosion of a man's entire persona. The confident executive vanished, replaced by a cornered, pallid shell. But he didn't crumble. He fought. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he sneered, trying to rally. "And I hardly think it's appropriate to base strategy on the ramblings of some temp analyst you've picked up." He gestured dismissively at Anya. "Who even is she?" "She is the woman who saved the deal you tried to murder," Arthur shot back, his voice like cracking ice. "I was trying to save this company," Gregory suddenly roared, rising from his chair, his face contorted with years of resentment. "You're a dinosaur, Arthur, clinging to the past, afraid to make the bold moves. The Klaus Werke merger would have secured our future for a century. I did it for us, for progress. And for the CEO position they promised you, I presume?" Arthur asked softly. Gregory froze, his tirade cut short. Anya spoke for the first time, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the tension. "The offer was contingent on a sterling stock price below $40 a share, triggered by the public failure of the Agrovast deal. The Phantom Translator, Leo Pasternak, was booked a one-way flight to Buenos Aires 2 days before your dinner. You paid for it with a prepaid debit card purchased with cash at a convenience store in Evanston. We have the security footage." She laid out each fact like a surgeon placing instruments for a final, fatal incision. Gregory stared at her, his mouth agape. He wasn't looking at a temp anymore. He was looking at his executioner. He sank back into his chair, utterly defeated, the fight gone from his eyes. By the end of the day, he was gone, escorted from the building not by security, but by 2 quiet men in dark suits from the SEC. His career was not just ruined, it was annihilated. Anya's probationary period was over before it had formally begun. Her new office was on the penthouse floor, adjacent to Arthur's. It had the same sweeping view of the city. For the first week, she would catch herself staring out the window, the vertigo of her ascent making her feel dizzy. The whispers followed her down the hallways, a mixture of awe and resentment. The Waitress, they called her. The Kingmaker. Her first official act as director of Eurasian Market Strategy was not a phone call. It was a tense meeting with the very department heads who had served under Gregory Finch. They were hostile, skeptical. They saw a usurper. She didn't try to win them over with charm. She won them over with competence. She laid out a 16-point implementation plan for the Agrovast depot rollout that was so detailed, so prescient of potential problems, so financially and logistically sound, that by the end of the meeting, the hostility had been replaced by a grudging, astonished silence. She had not just taken the title, she had earned it. That evening, she drove to the small clapboard house in Cicero where her parents lived. She didn't hand them a check. She sat with them at the worn kitchen table, the same table where she had learned Russian, and explained her new job. She then presented her father with a portfolio. Inside was not a bonus, but a comprehensive, fully funded trust, managed by Arthur Sterling's own financial advisors, dedicated to her parents' lifelong care and security. Her father, a man of few words, looked at the documents, his calloused hands trembling slightly. He looked up at her, his eyes clouded with tears. "Your grandmother," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She always said our history was our only real wealth. You took our history, Anyushka, and you built a future from it." 2 years later, Anya stood on a windswept step in the Ural Mountains, the air crisp and cold, smelling of black earth and diesel. Behind her, the 10th and final Sterling Agrovast Joint Service Depot gleamed under a vast pale sky, a monument of American steel and Russian ambition. Arthur Sterling, older now, but with a new lightness in his eyes, stood beside her. He watched a fleet of S-9000 combines moving across a colossal wheat field, their green chassis brilliant against the gold. "You know," he said, his voice carried by the wind, "I spent 50 years in this business believing that value was something you could quantify on a balance sheet. Parts, steel, stock prices. I saw people as assets or liabilities." He turned to her, the prairie wind catching in her dark hair. A deep, profound respect was etched on his face. "You taught me that a person's real value lies in the things that can't be quantified, in a history they carry, in a language they dream in the struggles that forge them. You weren't an asset I was hiding, Anya. You were the one who revealed the true value of everything else." Anya smiled, a slow, radiant smile that reached her eyes. She thought of the woman who had untied her apron in the Churchill room, a small, defiant act in a world that had tried to make her invisible. She hadn't shed that life for a new one. She had carried it with her. The waitress's attention to detail, the scholar's analytical mind, the daughter's fierce loyalty, the immigrant's unyielding resilience. They were all here, standing on this continent she had only ever known through stories, having translated not just a language, but her entire life into a language of power, purpose, and peace.